It's time for a tier list of Set 4 Vanguard. Has the Seraph Snow Grade 4 completely warped the game around it? Will Touken Ranbu ever do anything? Am I biased for Eugene? Well, let's find out. Before we go further, I just want to say that 98% of y'all aren't subscribed. Bruh. Let's start out in the Abyss. These are decks the game has completely left behind. The meta has so thoroughly passed these decks, there's nothing redeemable about them. In this tier, we have 5 Touken Ranbu decks and Willista. Touken Ranbu is just going to sit at the bottom of this list forever, isn't it? By the time we get the promo that this deck needs to do something, every other deck is just going to get 40 more cards. To recap why this entire nation is trash, this deck's best effects are along the lines of giving a unit 10k for a counterblast and a soul blast. Also, all variants of this deck are just weaker versions of other decks. Now we get on the Willista. Time has not been kind to a 3-attack deck that has no method of doing anything else. To hit numbers, this deck has to practically deck itself out with an over-the-top combo. This deck gets some of the best support from set 2 of Lyrical Monasterio, but since it ain't out yet, this deck is abysmal. This is E tier. These decks still function, but have severe problems keeping them from being good or commonly seen performing at events. In this tier we have Dragonic Overlord, Phantom Blaster Dragon, and Alestiel. Dragonic Overlord is hanging off the edge of a cliff over the abyss. It's not great, but hasn't got anything to fix its problems from set 2. This deck is still resource heavy, vulnerable to defensive checks, and is still basically locked into 3 attacks. I can't wait for set 5 so it's playable. Phantom Blaster Dragon got some new support that brings it up out of the abyss into a very solid D tier. First off, this deck can run Flagberg for extra drive checks. You're not doing anything else, so who cares about your hand or units? Second, this deck got another unit that can call 2 units off top deck rested. Piercing Armor Knight Mugen does take a card, but you're not getting better than that in this deck till it's retrained next set. These effects still don't get the deck out of this hole it's dug itself, with the cost of retiring 3 units for its awful payoff. More so now with decks like Magnolia running in-picks to give this unit resist. Alestiel is an unfortunate victim of gimmicky game design. It's got major consistency issues and has to choose between a less consistent crit white wing build or the janky board wipe power decrease black wing build. This deck needs more than 3 attacks or an actually powerful control effect to make it worth playing around the weird gimmick of having to bind a unit off top deck. As of right now, it's kind of just a wet noodle 3-attack deck. D tier is below average. These decks have solid strategies, but either lack the support to make the strategy work well, or just flat out get outpaced by every other deck. In this tier we have Feltyrosa, Eugene, Greedon, Hexaorb, and Orfist. Feltyrosa has been a victim of power creep. Why play her for extra drive checks when you could just play Bastion? She never had the highest numbers in the first place, and the deck's problem of quickly burning through resources becomes dramatically more of a problem in this meta. The deck can't handle Seraph Snow well, Magnolia, and Gravidia just run through it. The deck debatably was never better than Bruce for Bastion. It's just unfortunate for this deck. Eugene has been abused by Bushiroad. First, it has always been a wave of support behind every other deck. It got cut out of set 2 for Dragonic Overlord. It had its entire effects buffed and given to a Bruce rearguard, and now it has all of its goals in the game given to Seraph Snow and performed way better by Seraph Snow. I'm fully on this deck's hype train, but it is on life support. Magnolia and Nirvana don't even care about getting retired anymore. They were supposed to be this deck's best matchups. How do I handle in-picks? It's not okay anymore, Bushiroad. Greedon has been left in a very lackluster state with its new support. I keep looking at builds and some of them don't even run the new cards. The old strategy was basically held together by the fact that you could go to 7 damage while playing a 3-attack deck. But decks right now are just too fast for the set 3 strategy without any help. Technically, this deck can gain an extra rearguard attack, but the power is just too low to help. Hexaorb finally gained the restanding it needed and got crushed under the weight of everything in the deck, costing a counterblast and a soul blast. Sure, you can have 5 attacks turn 3, but you better get lucky and see a trigger, and have 2 open counterblast. And you'll need 1 to 2 more counterblast if you want any of those attacks to have any numbers. Just about every list I'm seeing is playing Magic of Appreciation Nanful to either fix the deck's resource problem, or Earnful Magician Asuno is showing up in list, and it takes a discard and it's still better than the counterblast problem. With the grade 4s, why does Hexaorb need a counterblast and a soul blast for triple drive? Orfist actually got nothing from set 4. I thought Eugene and Greedon did not get a lot, but oh my god, Orfist got nothing. I don't know what to do about this deck anymore. The deck doesn't even have the best turn 2 anymore. Seraph Snow is just gonna get to call out a full board turn 2, and is only gonna get better from there. This deck doesn't even have a purpose anymore outside of Big Boy Go Burr. Now we enter into the average tier. Decks here are just okay. Not great, but they're definitely not unplayable either. Here we have Zorga, Flagberg, Clarissa, Kairi, Loronerol, and grade 3 Bruce. Zorga has some greatly improved recursion thanks to Roaming Prison Dragon, and has a fantastic blitz order that gets power for each order and drop and bind zone with different names. This deck actually has an identity as a recursion heavy defensive toolbox deck now, but the biggest problem from earlier sets still remain. The deck's best orders to Alchemagic are still the ones from set 1 and 2. Instead of having stronger orders, this deck just decides to have more. You're alchemaging a card just to be on par with every other nation's orders. Flagberg got some fantastic support in Inland Dragon. The goal of setting up 5 attacks turn 3 has become infinitely more consistent thanks to him. Inlet Dragon also fills Soul and draws a card. Crippling Soul Dragon helps with Soul and countercharging. The deck still struggles with Soul and low numbers despite this, but the deck makes up for its low quality attacks with quantity. It's just unfortunate that Magnolia, Baromagnes, and Bastion do what this deck does but way better. Clarissa is in a much better spot this format than last. Decks this format like calling out rearguards, so our main value engine is viable. Unfortunately, this deck's other effects haven't aged too well and often get outperformed by the meta. 3 to 4 attacks at min numbers don't compete at the same level as 5 to 6 large attacks with additional effects on top. Clarissa is also vulnerable to retiring, which means this deck is hurt by a lot of the decks above on the tier list. Kairi is still a multi-attacking combo deck that gets pretty solid value. Unfortunately, this deck is too fragile to be higher on the list. New decks can eat your hand away, leaving it very hard for this deck to make it to turn 4 and combo off. This deck also gotten a bit less impressive, with decks like Bruce and Bastion getting just as many multi-attacks for infinitely less cost. Loronerol is still holding on to relevancy for dear life. The turn 4 multi-attacking guard restrict is still extremely good, but all the higher decks either receive tools to guard it better, or the ability to rush the deck down and deny the deck's win con. More retiring in the game also hurts. 6 of the above decks actively have retiring effects, and all of them could opt to run retiring if they felt like it. Bit of a side note, what makes these retiring effects good is that they do it as an afterthought, and it's not their only goal like in Eugene. Take the hint, Bushiroad. Take the hint. At the end of the day, Loronerol is just gatekept by Magnolia and Seraph Snow. Grade 3 Bruce is still the blowout deck it was last format. Now it just gets power crept out of the game for the grade 4s and rushed out by Baromagnes, Gravidia, and Magnolia. Leonard is a good tool against Magnolia, but if there's no way to live that long or with enough in hand to make a play, the deck is often left in a state of bullying out all the weaker decks without being able to play with the big boys above. Now we're moving on to B tier. Every deck here on out shows at least a fair bit of competitive viability. Consider these the rogue decks of a format. Here we have Bavsargra, Bastion, grade 4 Bruce, and Gravidia. Bavsargra is sitting pretty by taking all the best aspects from the bad decks this format. The deck has Eugene's retiring and soul charging, the deck has Zorga's grave recursion and free defense, and the deck has Phantom Blaster Dragon's critical without having to retire 3 of your own rearguards. The deck is a bit slower than all the crazy multi-attacking decks this format, but it's got the value to keep itself in the game, as well as having an equip that can deal damage if you need to catch up. The deck can hit some crazy high numbers, especially on Vanguard. It's just missing an extra attack or some beefier rearguards to threaten the opponent. Bastion now has the ability to scale in the turn 4. It's crazy how many cards from set 1 can still fit into this deck's list, but the grade 4 gives them a guaranteed full board restand, letting you not only pay the cost for Flagberg, but also beat stick your opponent down the old-fashioned way. That's 5 drive checks combined with Bastion's large numbers. Really, if this deck wasn't so heavy on going first, the deck would probably find itself higher on the list. Grade 4 Bruce trades Littered and Persona Ride for a full front row restand and triple drive. This build has some really funny options and really does blow up better than the grade 3 variant at the cost of not having Leonard's bold riping and calling out from Soul. This build can stack crits like a madman, and since Bruce attacks twice, buffing the Vanguard is objectively the right choice. Thanks to Evil Eye of Prohibition Quinn Liu, the deck has guard restrict. Really, this deck just suffers from the same problems as Bruce did last format, except now it just has more competition. It can't handle aggro, and it really needs to go first to hit its combo. Lastly, in B tier we have Gravidia. Gravidia is the terrifying pop-off aggro deck that can just win out of nowhere if the opponent either can't PG the Vanguard, or you hit triggers. This deck got the cycling it needed to both not deck out and always have enough orders on field for multiple turns of its assault. Not only that, the deck has criticals on rearguards now. This gives them a bit more pressure if they're not outright lucky. If you're lucky, or you're just cheating, play Gravidia. It's probably your best option. Now we move on to top A tier decks. These decks are definitely stronger than the rest, but aren't quite as overpowering as the very top tier. Bro, someone at Bushiroad really looked at set through Baromagnes and he said, you know what the 5 attack turn 3 guard restrict deck needs? Higher numbers and more consistency. The numbers the deck can hit thanks to Quahigra and Brainwash Swirler mean you don't even have to run the guard restrict anymore. The deck can also pull cards out of Soul to either ensure extra soul charges or to set up for a guard later. The putting the soul board wipe the deck is known for is still brutal to just about every deck it does it to. Really what stops the deck is it can get its game plan shattered by any of the other decks if they go first, or if they get a lucky heal. Nirvana is a really tricky deck to place this format. The ability to draw around 5 or more extra cards a turn is ridiculous, and kinda needed to offset the Overdress mechanic. The deck can now fully make use of grade 3 Expecta because that Soul Blast everything cost is now just set up for the grade 4 Esperata. The deck hits an easy 4 to 5 large attacks on turn 4, and if the opponent is low on damage, the deck could force the opponent to take a damage. What makes this deck tricky to rank is that the Overdress mechanic still plays badly in the Seraph Snow, and Magnolia can rush down this deck very well. These factors, I think, just keep it out of the top spot, but I think Nirvana is a lot closer to the top than it probably should be. It just comes down to a good player being able to go both first and hold their cards for the right time. Now we're in the S tier. These are the decks that warp the format around them, as they're just that good. Here we have Seraph Snow. Seraph Snow is strong because of the new grade 4 for this deck, gave Seraph Snow's early game a late game win button for literally no cost. Imprison from the hand, field, and soul, while buffing your board to an insane degree. Every other deck has to pivot their strategy to account for this card. Besides that turn 4 win con, this deck could cruise through its early game as well, by imprisoning cards from your opponent's hand or deck, which makes your opponent's plays less planned through than they otherwise should be. The only thing that slows this deck down is resist effects like in-picks, or not being able to go first. Some decks like Bruce or Nirvana can kill before this deck hits its win con. Sound the alarm. Magnolia can consistently hit through triggers. Also, they can give their units resist, have ways of filling soul, and can see their persona right. He's now grade 4 more consistently. This deck's also got the ability to call out more free units than ever before, so that mediocre 4-6 attack strategy is now incredibly threatening, especially if it goes first. Magnolia can eat through an opponent's hand incredibly quickly and hit high numbers thanks to Gnosala. This deck is less dependent on counterblast now, which means the deck can run wild with less counterplay. Multi-attacking is always the strongest in Vanguard when it's not tied down to something, and Magnolia just blows away every other deck. The only thing this deck struggles with is getting board wiped thanks to in-picks. A lot of decks can't. So what does this mean for the meta as a whole? The grade 4s for this set have really power crept the game significantly. Lyrical as a whole is slowly sliding off into the void, and this should be a measuring stick for how much power creep the game has gone through. I actually like the meta a lot. Among the S and B tier decks, there's a lot of counterplay during games, and a lot of options in deck building. It's just unfortunate that a lot of decks are being left behind. Overdress had kind of spoiled us with its opening sets. It's now stabilizing into a more traditional card game with its power gap. Where in last format I think the decks at mid-level could compete, I'm not so sure anymore. At least in this format, there's a very solid balance of what nations make it to the top spots. It's still very Brantgate and Dark States heavy, but now Dragon Empire and Storkea get a chance to shine when they really haven't been able to do that yet. I want to mention that I made a Discord server. On the server, you can see what wacky content I'm working on, vote on what decks get profiles on, or just hang out and talk about card games. No idea what's coming up next for a Vanguard video, but do subscribe so you can see it when it comes out. I put a lot of work into these videos, and they're only getting better as I go. I hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching.